A quiet country road or the stage for something much bigger, when one sheriff, fueled by prejudice, thinks he can intimidate and overpower a black woman just passing through. But he doesn't know who she is. She's not just any woman, she's a retired Army general. And tonight, she's the one holding the line. What starts as a routine stop quickly spirals into a showdown between authority and truth, pride and justice. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends until we get there together. So before we dive in, let us know what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your voice in this conversation. Angela Coleman hadn't set foot in Fairmont, Texas, in over 20 years, but today, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills and bathed the narrow streets in a soft golden glow, she found herself driving back into the very heart of it. Fairmont wasn't much different from how she remembered, still quiet, still clinging to its small-town charm, still lined with old storefronts and diners where the regulars knew each other by name. But for Angela, this wasn't just any town. It held memories, some warm, some painful, but all part of the patchwork of her life. Her hands rested steady on the wheel of her old sedan, a dependable car with more miles on it than most would trust. But she liked it that way. It was unassuming, practical, like her. The paint had faded to a dull gray over the years, the edges kissed with rust, but the engine still hummed like a loyal friend. She could afford something flashier after all. She'd spent 35 years in service to her country, retiring as a major general in the United States Army. But Angela Coleman wasn't one for appearances, never had been. The road stretched out before her, lined with pecan trees that cast long shadows across the pavement. She rolled down the window, letting in the crisp autumn air, the scent of the earth, the faint tinge of wood smoke. It reminded her of childhood summers long past. She breathed it in, steadying herself. This wasn't an easy visit. She'd been invited to a veterans dinner hosted by Mayor Frank Delgado, a man she'd met briefly at a national military conference. Delgado was Fairmont's first Hispanic mayor, young for the role but already making waves for pushing for community unity in a place that didn't always welcome change. Angela hadn't planned on attending. She liked to keep to herself since retiring. No fanfare, no spotlight. Her days were simple mornings with a cup of black coffee and the newspaper spread across her small kitchen table. Afternoons spent walking the quiet streets of the town she now called home. Miles away from Fairmont, she'd traded the chaos of Army life for the peaceful rhythm of retirement. But something about Delgado's invitation had stuck with her. "We'd be honored to have you, General Coleman," he'd said over the phone, his voice warm but insistent. "The community could learn from your example. And frankly, I think we could all use a reminder of what real leadership looks like." Angela smiled at the memory, shaking her head gently. She hadn't corrected him. She preferred Major General Coleman, but the sentiment had touched her. She hadn't worn the uniform in years, but the weight of it still felt fresh on her shoulders. Now, as the town's water tower came into view, painted with "Welcome to Fairmont" in fading blue letters, Angela felt the weight of the past settle in. She remembered marching down those streets as a girl, watching parades pass, standing proud when her father, also a veteran, tipped his hat to the flag. But she also remembered the stares, the whispered remarks from those who couldn't quite accept a black family standing tall in a place like this. Fairmont had changed in some ways, but in others, it hadn't moved an inch. As she turned down Main Street, she passed the old diner where her mother used to take her for pie after Sunday service. The neon sign still flickered, casting a pink glow onto the sidewalk. For a moment, the years melted away, and she could almost hear her mother's soft laugh, see the glint of pride in her father's eyes when they'd talked about her future. "You're gonna do great things, Angie." Her father used to say, "Don't let anyone tell you different." And she had done great things. 35 years in uniform, rising through the ranks. When most expected her to fail, she'd commanded battalions, led troops into combat zones, made life and death decisions that shaped the lives of thousands. She'd stood in rooms where few looked like her and earned respect the hard way through discipline, integrity, and the unwavering belief that justice was worth fighting for. Her chest bore medals of valor, commendations that spoke of sacrifice and courage, but she rarely spoke of them. Those honors stayed tucked away in a simple wooden box at home, alongside a folded American flag and a photograph of her last unit. That's who she was. Quiet strength. Purpose without fanfare. She'd brought a small gift with her tonight, a bronze eagle statuette that once sat on her desk at the Pentagon. She planned to give it to Mayor Delgado, a small token of appreciation for inviting her, for seeing past the surface and recognizing the service beneath. It wasn't much, but it felt right. Her gaze drifted to the rearview mirror, catching her reflection. The silver streaks in her tightly coiled hair glinted under the soft light. Her face bore the lines of a life lived fully, the quiet creases around her mouth a testament to every smile, every struggle. She adjusted the mirror slightly, straightening her shoulders. The veterans' dinner wasn't just about a meal. It was about connection, about remembering where she came from, about reminding this town and maybe even herself that she still had a voice, that her story mattered. And yet, as the sun dipped lower and the shadows lengthened, a flicker of unease stirred in her chest. She couldn't name it exactly, a tension beneath the surface, like the calm before a storm. Maybe it was the memories, or maybe it was something more. But Angela Coleman had learned long ago to trust her instincts. And tonight, those instincts whispered that Fairmont wasn't finished teaching her lessons just yet. What she didn't know was that the road ahead wouldn't just test her patience, it would test the very justice she'd spent her life defending, and that this small, quiet town would soon be at the center of a storm no one could ignore. Wade Rourke knew every inch of Fairmont's streets like the back of his hand. Had for years. Sheriff of this town for nearly 2 decades, he'd seen people come and go, but not much else changed. The same storefronts, the same families, the same faces at Sunday service. That's how he liked it. Predictable, comfortable, in control. But today, something felt off. He leaned back in his squad car, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dashboard, the air conditioner humming softly as it fought the Texas heat. His boots rested heavy on the floorboard, the well-worn leather creased from years of patrols. Out here, on the edges of town where the roads turned dusty and the fields stretched out wide, he could breathe easier. But even this quiet stretch of highway couldn't calm the low hum of frustration simmering beneath the surface. Ever since Frank Delgado became mayor, things had been shifting, and not in ways Wade appreciated. Delgado, with his smooth words about unity and progress, always pushing for change, bringing in outsiders to the conversation. Folks who didn't understand Fairmont, folks who didn't belong. Wade felt it in every city council meeting, every press release about new programs and initiatives. They called it progress. Wade called it trouble, and that's when he saw a car that didn't fit. An older sedan, gray, the kind that looked like it belonged anywhere but here, cruising down Main Street like it had a right to, out-of-state plates, too. His eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. Fairmont wasn't a tourist town, not the kind of place you stumbled into by accident. People either lived here or they passed through quick. But this car? No, this car had been lingering. He'd noticed it earlier at the gas station on Elm, parked for a little too long, and now, here it was again. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking under his weight, and adjusted his rearview mirror, watching as the sedan turned down Maple Avenue, heading toward the quieter part of town. His jaw tightened. Something about it rubbed him the wrong way. He couldn't explain it. Not exactly. Maybe it was the driver's posture, too calm, too sure. Maybe it was the way she held her head high, like she wasn't just passing through but had a right to be here. That confidence, It set his teeth on edge. "Let's see what we've got here," Wade muttered under his breath, flipping on his turn signal and easing out onto the road behind her. He didn't hit the lights. Not yet. No need to spook anyone. Just a little drive, a little observation, see where she was headed, who she was meeting. The town slipped by, familiar landmarks fading into the periphery as Wade followed the sedan down toward the edge of town. He kept a respectable distance, far enough back not to be obvious, but close enough to keep her in sight. His fingers hovered near the radio, but he didn't call it in. No reason. Not yet. The woman drove steady, not speeding, not weaving, everything by the book, and that bothered him even more. People who didn't have anything to hide usually looked nervous when a patrol car trailed behind. She didn't. Her posture stayed firm, head high, eyes straight ahead. Like she didn't care who followed. That's when Wade's frustration started to bubble. He told himself it was about the car, about the plates, about keeping Fairmont safe from things that didn't belong. But deep down, it was more than that. It was the way she carried herself, like she wasn't afraid, like she knew she had every right to be here, driving down these roads he'd patrolled his whole life. And Wade Rourke didn't like feeling irrelevant. He'd spent years earning his place here, keeping order, keeping the peace. People respected him, feared him, even. That's how it worked, in small towns. But now, with every speech Delgado made about change, about bridging gaps and building communities, Wade felt that control slipping, inch by inch. The sedan slowed at a stop sign, pausing longer than necessary. Wade squinted, watching her eyes flick to the rearview mirror, locking onto him. She saw him. She knew he was there, and still, she didn't flinch. He clenched his jaw tighter. That was enough. Enough watching. Enough waiting. His hand moved to the dashboard, flipping on the red and blue lights. With a sharp click, the siren gave a quick, piercing wail before settling into silence. The colored lights flashing against the back of the gray sedan, she pulled over without hesitation, easing onto the gravel shoulder. Smooth. Calm. Like this was nothing new. Wade pulled up behind her, shutting off the siren but leaving the lights flashing, broadcasting his authority across the empty stretch of road. His hand drifted to his belt, fingers brushing the cool metal of his holster, not drawing but feeling the weight of it there. A familiar reassurance. He sat for a moment, letting the silence hang between them, the lights casting long shadows, watching, waiting, making sure she knew who was in charge. But even then, something in the pit of his stomach twisted. That woman hadn't broken a single law, not one. And he knew it. But knowing wasn't enough. Not for Wade Rourke. Not when his authority felt like it was slipping away 1 inch at a time. Tonight, he told himself, was about reminding people where they stood, about showing them that Fairmont was still his town. He pushed the door open, stepped out into the fading light, boots crunching against gravel as he made his way toward the sedan, his jaw set firm, his hand resting just near the holster. Ready, always ready. And as the wind carried the faint scent of dust and dying light, Wade Rourke took that first step toward a confrontation that would change everything. The gravel shifted under Wade Rourke's boots as he closed the distance to the gray sedan, his shoulders squared, his brow furrowed, every step purposeful. The red and blue lights from his patrol car danced across the rear window, illuminating the outline of the driver's head. She sat there, hands visible on the wheel, still, composed, not a trace of panic, not even a flicker of nervousness. That alone was enough to set Wade's teeth on edge. He reached the driver's side, towering slightly as he looked in through the open window. The woman turned to face him, her eyes steady, meeting his gaze without flinching. Her face carried the soft lines of experience, streaks of silver winding through her hair like threads of wisdom. And the way she sat upright, alert, spoke volumes, not defiant, not apologetic, just calm. Controlled. Wade didn't like it. License and registration, he snapped, tapping his knuckles against the doorframe. The woman nodded politely, but didn't move right away. Instead, her voice came even, steady as the horizon. "Good evening, officer. May I ask what I've been pulled over for?" Wade's jaw tightened. That question, always that question, from people who thought they were too clever for their own good. He leaned in slightly, resting one hand on the door, the other near his belt. "This isn't about questions, ma'am. It's about following instructions. License and registration. Now." She didn't flinch, didn't waver. Instead, she offered a small nod, the kind that showed respect without submission. "I'm happy to comply," she said, "but I'd still like to know the reason for the stop." Her tone wasn't confrontational, if anything. It was too polite, too measured. That was the problem. Wade felt it like a stone in his shoe. She wasn't giving him anything to work with, nothing to throw back at her. He leaned in a little closer, his smirk tightening into something more pointed. "You're driving a beat-up car in a neighborhood where people like you don't usually belong," he said, his voice dropping to something harder, colder. "That's reason enough for me." Her jaw shifted just slightly, but her expression stayed even. "People like me?" she repeated, her voice soft but edged like steel beneath velvet. Wade straightened, the air between them thick with something unsaid but unmistakable. He'd been through this dance before, thought he knew how it would play out, but the way she held his gaze made him feel like he was the one being scrutinized. "I've broken no laws, officer," she continued, "and this vehicle is registered in my name. I'm on my way to a dinner invitation, nothing more." He let out a short, mocking laugh. "Dinner invitation? Let me guess, some charity handout or church gathering?" He didn't wait for her answer, waving his hand dismissively. "Doesn't really matter. Show me your ID, or I'll assume you're hiding something." Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it became quieter, but firmer, anchored by something deeper than the conversation at hand. "Assumptions like that have no place in professional law enforcement," she said, her words cutting clean and precise. "Unless you can articulate a valid reason for this stop, I must insist on my rights as a citizen." Wade's smirk faltered, replaced by something meaner. His hand dropped instinctively to his belt, hovering near his holster. He didn't draw, but he didn't have to. The gesture was enough, a silent threat hanging in the humid Texas air. "You think you're calling the shots here?" His voice dropped to a low growl. "I don't take orders from you, lady. You don't get to dictate how this goes." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she stayed unmoved. "If you believe you have cause, officer, I suggest you call your supervisor." Her words struck like a slap. Call his supervisor? Who the hell did she think she was? Wade stepped back, folding his arms tightly across his chest, the tension in his jaw grinding with every breath. "Let me make this simple for you," he said, voice sharp as broken glass. "Either you cooperate, or I'll drag you out of this car myself and take you down to the station. How's that sound?" The woman exhaled slowly, steadying herself, but there was no fear in her eyes. No breaking. "It sounds like you're abusing your authority," she replied, clear as a bell in the evening quiet. "And if that's your approach, officer, I'll have no choice but to report this incident." Wade felt the heat rise in his chest, his face flushed, his pulse quickened. How dare she? Report him? He leaned in again, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "Go ahead," he sneered. "Report me. See how far that gets you. People like me run this system. People like you. You're just passing through." Her gaze didn't break. Not even a flicker. "I've faced men with far more power than you," she said calmly, "and I've never backed down when I knew I was right. Tonight won't be any different." Wade straightened, his smirk returning but colder now, devoid of humor. You think you're special, huh? Just another self-important." He stopped short. Movement caught his eye from across the street. A young woman had paused on the sidewalk, her phone raised, camera recording. Wade's stomach turned. The scene was no longer private. "Hey!" he barked, pointing at the bystander. "Turn that off and move along. This is official business." The young woman hesitated, her voice carrying just enough defiance to be heard. "It's a public street," she said, gripping her phone tighter. The woman in the car, Angela, though Wade didn't know her name yet, took the moment to speak. "You're well within your rights," she called out. "Stay at a safe distance, but keep recording." Wade's face darkened, the muscles in his jaw working overtime. "You think this is a game?" he snapped, turning back to her. "You're only making this worse for yourself." Angela's voice remained steady, the calm center in a growing storm. "I'm making sure the truth is documented," she said, simply. Wade took a step back, his hand drifting once more toward his holster, his mind racing, his control slipping. This wasn't going the way he wanted, not even close. And as the shadows stretched longer across that lonely Texas road, the tension between them grew thick enough to cut with a knife. But Angela Coleman wasn't backing down, and Wade Rourke? He was too far in to pull back now. This was just the beginning. The sun dipped lower behind the Texas hills, casting long shadows across the empty stretch of road where Angela Coleman sat still behind the wheel of her sedan. The red and blue lights from Sheriff Wade Rourke's cruiser pulsed rhythmically, painting the inside of her car in sharp, flickering hues. The weight of the moment settled in, thick and heavy, but Angela's hands remained steady on the steering wheel, her breath even, her heart calm. She'd been in worse situations, far worse. Combat zones, where the air itself seemed to hum with danger. Nights spent under foreign skies, making decisions that meant life or death for her troops. She knew how to keep steady when the world tilted, and right now, the world was tilting. Outside her window, Wade Rourke hovered, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched tight. He wanted her rattled, wanted her to feel the weight of his authority pressing down. But when she held his gaze firm, unyielding, he saw none of the fear he expected. And that only made him angrier. He leaned down closer, knuckles tapping against the metal of her door. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," he said, the words coming out slower now, edged with warning. Angela stayed still, her voice level. "I've asked for the reason behind this stop, Sheriff. You've yet to provide one." His smirk faltered, just for a second, and something darker flickered behind his eyes. That was the thing about power. It wasn't just about holding it. It was about how people reacted to it. And Angela? She wasn't reacting the way he wanted. Wade straightened, folding his arms across his chest. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, each waiting for the other to make the next move. But Wade was growing restless. His fingers tapped impatiently on the leather of his belt, just inches from the handle of his gun. And then, from the corner of Angela's eye, a movement. Across the street, a young woman had stopped on the sidewalk. She wore jeans, a plain T-shirt, her hair pulled back loosely. But it wasn't her appearance that mattered, it was the phone in her hand. Raised, recording. Cassie Monroe wasn't looking for trouble when she turned down that street. She was just walking home from her shift at the local diner, the same one her mother worked at years ago. But when she saw the flashing lights, saw the way the sheriff stood over that car, saw the way the woman behind the wheel held herself, something told her to stop, to bear witness. She raised her phone, started recording, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve hardening. Wade caught sight of her, his eyes narrowing. His authority was no longer unchecked. "Hey!" He barked across the road, his voice sharp, cutting through the thickening air. "Turn that off and keep moving. This is official business." Cassie didn't move. She took a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a public street." Angela seized the moment, her voice cutting through the tension, calm but commanding. You have every right to record. Just stay at a safe distance." Wade's jaw clenched, the muscles along his neck tightening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to control this narrative, this encounter. But now, with every second Cassie's phone stayed raised, that control slipped further from his grasp. His hand dropped to his belt again, hovering near his holster. The weight of the gun like a promise. He leaned in toward Angela's window, lowering his voice to a venomous hiss. "You're making this worse for yourself." Angela's gaze didn't falter. "I'm protecting myself, Sheriff. You've given me every reason to." That struck deep, and Wade knew it. But pride was a stubborn thing. It didn't let go easy. He turned back toward Cassie, his boots grinding against the gravel. "I said, turn that off." His voice cracked, the anger spilling out, louder now, desperate. "Move along or I'll arrest you for obstruction." Cassie swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the phone, but she didn't lower it. "Before standing on a sidewalk?" she asked, her voice shaking but clear. "You're threatening me for recording." Angela spoke again, her tone cool but edged with steel. "Sheriff Rourke, I suggest you reconsider your actions. Threatening an innocent bystander only adds to your misconduct." Wade snapped his head back toward her, his eyes blazing. His hand hovered so close to his weapon now that the slightest twitch could send this moment spiraling out of control. "You don't get to tell me how to do my job," he spat. But the words rang hollow. Angela kept her hands visible, resting lightly on the wheel. Her military training taught her that in moments like this, control wasn't just about action, it was about presence. "I'm reminding you of the law," she replied, voice calm, measured. "The law you're sworn to uphold." For a moment, Wade stood frozen, trapped between his pride and the reality closing in around him. His chest heaved as the weight of Cassie's camera bore down on him, the lens a silent witness to everything. And then, as if the tension couldn't stretch any tighter, Wade lashed out. His hand slammed down on the roof of Angela's car, the sharp metallic thud echoing in the quiet street. "Enough," he barked. "Hand over your license and registration, or I'll haul you out of this car myself." Angela didn't flinch. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice steady as ever. "You've provided no legitimate reason for this stop. Your actions are not only unethical, they're illegal." Her words pushed Wade further toward the edge. He wasn't thinking straight anymore. His vision narrowed. His pulse thundered in his ears. He reached for the handle of Angela's door, yanking at it hard, but the lock held fast. The door didn't budge. "Unlock the door!" he snapped, shaking the handle like that would change anything. Angela stayed still, her hand hovering near her phone. "You've already escalated this far beyond protocol, Sheriff," she said. "I won't give you another opportunity to violate my rights." Cassie's camera caught every second the sheriff's wild eyes, his frantic grasping at the door, the quiet strength in Angela's posture. The standoff wasn't just between two people. Now it was between truth and power, between justice and abuse. Wade's breath came in ragged bursts as he turned back toward Cassie, her phone still raised, unwavering. "You're complicit in this," he snarled at her, his voice cracking. "If you don't stop filming, I'll arrest you." Cassie stood her ground. Her voice trembled, but she didn't back down. "Go ahead," she whispered. "Try it." This video will tell a different story. The night stretched on, silent and heavy. The three of them locked in a fragile triangle, none willing to back down, each holding their ground in their own way. Angela broke the silence, her voice soft but certain. "Sheriff Rourke, you're digging yourself into a deeper hole with every word, every action. I advise you to stop before it's too late." But Wade? Wade couldn't hear it. His pride wouldn't let him. Not yet. And as the first sound of distant sirens echoed down the highway, signaling that backup or judgment was coming, the tension on that lonely road held fast. For now, the air between them was thick, charged with something raw and dangerous. As Sheriff Wade Rourke stood just outside Angela Coleman's window, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon, the flicker of red and blue lights from his cruiser bounced off the sedan's side panels, casting sharp shadows across both their faces. Angela's hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, her back straight, her eyes never leaving his, but Wade was unraveling. You could see it in the set of his jaw, in the way his lips curled with frustration, in how his fingers twitched closer to the butt of his pistol every time she spoke. She wasn't giving him what he wanted. No fear, no submission. And that burned him up inside. From across the street, Cassie Monroe kept filming. The young woman, barely in her late 20s, had stumbled onto the scene by chance, but now she stood rooted, phone raised, recording every word, every movement. She knew what this was. She'd seen stories like this before, but this time she was part of it. Her voice quivered as she narrated quietly into the camera, making sure the world would know exactly how this night unfolded. And Wade? He felt that camera like a noose tightening around his throat. His authority, his control was slipping with every second the record light blinked. "I'm not going to ask again," Wade growled, voice low, venomous. "Step out of the vehicle." Angela kept her voice even, like steel beneath silk. "I've asked for a lawful reason for this stop, and you've given me none. You know this is illegal." Wade's fingers flexed near his gun, the weight of it too tempting to ignore. The law didn't matter much to him right now. His pride was screaming too loud to hear anything else. This wasn't about procedure anymore, it was about control, about putting this woman in her place. And then, like a snap, the last thread of his patience broke. His hand shot down, drawing his pistol in one smooth, practiced motion, the cold barrel leveling at Angela through the half-open window. "Out! Now!" he barked, finger twitching just above the trigger. His eyes burned with something reckless, something dangerous. But Angela didn't flinch. She didn't scream, didn't cower, didn't beg. Instead, her training took over. Decades of standing in front of men with far more firepower, in far more dangerous situations, gave her the calm that Wade Rourke could never understand. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands, palms open, showing she held nothing. "Officer," she said, voice steady, despite the gun pointed inches from her face. "I am unarmed. There is no need for this." But Wade wasn't listening. His chest rose and fell in sharp, angry bursts, sweat beading along his brow. He could feel Cassie's camera on him, knew she was catching every second of this, but that only made the fire inside him burn hotter. He couldn't back down now, not with an audience. "I said, get out," he snarled again, stepping closer, raising the pistol higher. Angela held his gaze, unmoved, and that infuriated him even more. He wanted fear. He wanted to see her crack, but all he saw was resolve. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly, her voice like calm water. "This isn't going to end the way you think it will." Wade's face twisted, his knuckles whitening on the grip of the pistol. "Shut up," he snapped, his voice cracking at the edges. "You don't get to talk down to me." Cassie's voice wavered from the sidewalk, barely above a whisper but filled with urgency. "You're pointing a gun at an innocent woman. What are you doing?" "Stay out of this," Wade snapped, not taking his eyes off Angela. Angela seized the moment. Her hands still raised, she leaned just slightly toward the passenger seat, pressing a button on her phone without looking. The screen lit up, dialing on speaker. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice came through. "Angela, everything okay?" The voice of Mayor Frank Delgado filled the air, cutting through the tension like a blade. Calm, steady, and filled with authority. But Wade's temper flared. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked, eyes darting toward the glowing phone screen. Angela kept her gaze locked on him. "I'm letting someone know that I'm being threatened by an armed officer without cause," she said, her voice unwavering. That officer's name is Sheriff Wade Rourke. On the other end of the line, Delgado's voice sharpened. "Stay calm, Angela. I'm on my way. Do not hang up." The words hit Wade like a punch to the gut. His grip on the gun faltered, just slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him lower it. "I don't care who you called," he muttered, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Right now, I'm the law." Angela's hands remained steady, still raised, but her voice grew firmer, carrying the weight of every rank, every command she'd ever given. "You're not the law, Sheriff. The law is clear, and you're violating it." Wade's breath came fast and shallow. His mind raced, looking for a way out, but his pride boxed him in. His weapon, still aimed at her, trembled slightly. And then, from down the road, the sound of sirens echoed faintly, growing louder with every passing second. Cassie's camera caught everything: Wade's trembling hands, Angela's steady defiance, the growing crowd of onlookers who'd gathered, drawn by the flashing lights and rising tension. The sirens grew closer. The red and blue glow of approaching patrol cars flickered along the horizon. "Put the gun down, Wade," Angela said, her voice low but commanding. "It's over," but Wade couldn't hear it. His ego, his anger, his fear, they screamed louder than the sirens. He took a step closer, the pistol shaking in his grasp. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "You're just another." His words caught in his throat as headlights bathed the scene in bright white. Another squad car, a black SUV, pulled up fast behind it. The vehicles came to a hard stop, doors flying open as officers stepped out, weapons holstered but hands at the ready. From the SUV, Mayor Frank Delgado emerged, his face tight with urgency. Behind him, Police Chief David Norris, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating authority. "Wade!" Delgado's voice rang out, sharp as a whip. "Lower your weapon." But Wade hesitated, the weight of the gun still pulling him forward. His jaw clenched, his pride screaming not to surrender. His knees locked, refusing to budge. "Sheriff Rourke." Chief Norris stepped forward, voice booming. "Holster your weapon. Now." The moment stretched, tense and fragile, like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. Wade's fingers twitched on the grip. Angela didn't move, her hands still raised, her gaze steady, unwavering. And then, like the snap of a branch, Wade's resolve broke. His shoulders sagged, the pistol lowering by inches before he finally holstered it with a shaking hand. But his eyes stayed hard, locked on Angela with a glare that refused to admit defeat. But it didn't matter. The gun was down. The crowd exhaled. Angela slowly lowered her hands, but her eyes never left his. The battle was over. For now, the sirens faded into the background, but the echo of that moment, the weight of it hung heavy in the air. Wade Rourke had drawn a line in the sand, and now the reckoning would begin. Angela Coleman sat still in the driver's seat, her hands raised just below eye level, palms open and facing outward. The cold steel of Wade Rourke's pistol hovered inches from her face, the barrel steady but the man behind it trembling with anger and pride. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. The weight of the moment pressed down on her like the humid Texas night, but her voice stayed calm, unshaken. "Sheriff," she said, each word measured, deliberate. "You're pointing a weapon at an unarmed citizen. I am no threat to you." But Wade Rourke didn't lower the gun, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the grip, sweat glistening at his temple. His eyes darted briefly toward the sidewalk, where Cassie Monroe's phone remained steady, recording everything. The glare from the streetlight cast long shadows beneath his eyes, turning the strain in his face into something harsher, something uglier. He couldn't pull away now, not in front of the camera, not with his authority hanging in the balance. Angela knew exactly what she was dealing with. She'd seen it before in war zones, in boardrooms, in the tense faces of men who'd built their whole sense of self on the idea of control. And now, with his back against the wall, Sheriff Wade Rourke was just another man cornered by his own pride. I said, "Get out of the car." Wade snapped again, voice louder this time, more frantic. The barrel of his pistol jabbed toward her window, the motion sharp and jerky. "Don't make me repeat myself." Angela's hands didn't waver. She kept her gaze locked on his, steady as the earth beneath them. "I'm giving you a chance to step back from this," she said quietly. Before it goes too far, her words didn't soothe him. They stoked the fire, burning beneath his skin. Wade's pride was too fragile, too brittle to hear reason now. He took another step forward, the barrel of his gun tapping against the glass of her window. Angela didn't flinch. Instead, with a subtle shift of her hand, she reached toward the passenger seat. Slowly, carefully, her fingers pressed against her phone's screen. One button, a single tap. The call connected, and then, from the speaker, the calm voice of Mayor Frank Delgado cut through the tension like a blade. "Angela, what's happening? Are you safe?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the pistol. "Who the hell are you calling?" he barked, though his voice trembled with something that sounded a lot like fear. Angela's lips parted just enough for her voice to flow steady and clear. Mayor, I'm being held at gunpoint by Sheriff Wade Rourke. He's provided no lawful reason for the stop. I am unarmed." For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then Delgado's voice sharpened. "Stay calm. I'm coming. Don't move. I'm bringing the chief with me." Wade's face twisted, a flush rising beneath his collar. "I don't care who you called," he muttered, though the words felt hollow. "I'm the law here." Angela's gaze stayed level. "You've forgotten what the law is." The weight of that truth landed like a hammer between them. Wade's pistol shook, barely perceptible, but enough for the camera to catch. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, still too far to offer any comfort, but loud enough to remind Wade that this wasn't a vacuum. Help was coming. Witnesses were gathering. "You think a phone call's going to save you?" Wade sneered, though the edges of his voice frayed at the corners. "You're not walking away from this." Angela's voice grew firmer, deeper, carrying the quiet command of a woman who had once led soldiers into battle. "I've walked away from worse than you." But Wade's mind was racing, the walls closing in on him faster than he could stop them. His breathing quickened. His heart pounded louder than the approaching sirens. His grip on the gun faltered for a split second, but pride wouldn't let him lower it. From the sidewalk, Cassie's voice broke through. "You're pointing a gun at an innocent woman," she shouted, her fear rising with each passing second. "What are you doing? Stay out of this!" Wade snapped without looking at her. His eyes stayed locked on Angela, like if he just kept staring, he could regain some semblance of control. But Angela's voice cut through again, calm but unyielding. "You're going to answer for this, Sheriff. Every second you keep that gun raised is another line you can't uncross." And then the sirens grew louder, washing over the scene, bouncing off the metal of Angela's car and the asphalt beneath their feet. Headlights flooded the road behind Wade's cruiser as two patrol cars pulled up fast, brakes screeching. Officers stepped out, hands near their holsters, eyes wide with confusion. But they weren't alone. A black SUV pulled up behind them, sleek and unmarked, and from it stepped Mayor Frank Delgado, his face tight with urgency. Beside him, Police Chief David Norris, tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform sharp, his presence commanding. Wade turned his head for the first time, his pistol still raised, but his resolve crumbling. "Sheriff Rourke!" Norris's voice boomed across the road, sharp and unwavering. "Holster your weapon." Now, Wade froze. His jaw clenched, his eyes darted between Angela's steady gaze and the growing line of officers behind him. "I said holster it." Norris barked again, stepping closer, his hand near his own holster but not drawing. His voice was enough. And then, like a dam breaking, Wade's shoulders sagged. His arm trembled, as he slowly lowered the pistol, sliding it back into the holster. But the anger, the resentment, still burned in his eyes. Angela lowered her hands, slowly, carefully, but her gaze never left him. The danger had passed for now, but the weight of what had just happened lingered heavy in the air. Delgado stepped forward, his face pale beneath the harsh lights. "Angela," he said softly, "are you all right?" She nodded once, keeping her composure, though the tightness in her chest didn't ease. "I'm unhurt, but this man," she gestured toward Wade, "needs to answer for what he's done." Norris turned to Wade, his expression hardening. "We're going to have a long conversation about this, Sheriff." Wade's lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. He said nothing, but inside, the storm raged on. The cameras were still rolling, the witnesses still watching. And this wasn't over. The flashing lights painted the quiet Texas road in shades of red and blue, reflecting off the dust that hung in the air. Sheriff Wade Rourke stood frozen, his hand hovering over the holster that still held his gun, his posture rigid with defiance. Across from him, Mayor Frank Delgado and Police Chief David Norris moved swiftly, the weight of what they'd just witnessed pressing down hard. And Angela Coleman, she remained steady, her hands now lowered, but her presence just as commanding as it had been, with a gun pointed at her chest. But what neither Wade nor anyone else could ignore was the slow gathering of onlookers. Word had spread. The glow of patrol lights, the raised voices, the echo of sirens. It was a beacon. In small towns like Fairmont, it didn't take long for people to show up when something happened. First, a trickle of curious neighbors stepping out onto their porches. Then, a few more, inching closer, phones in hand. Drawn by the rising tension, by the time Delgado's SUV had arrived, so had a crowd, a growing sea of faces, lit by cell phone screens, murmuring quietly as they tried to piece together what was unfolding before them. And Cassie Monroe was still there, front and center, her phone steady in her grip, recording every word, every movement. Her footage had already begun spreading, streaming live, finding its way onto social media feeds, reaching far beyond the limits of this dusty Texas town. The sheriff's gun might have been holstered, but the damage had been done. The crowd had seen the barrel pointed through Angela's window. They'd seen the woman standing tall and unshaken, and the sheriff faltering before her. "Sheriff Rourke," Chief Norris said again, stepping closer, his voice low but firm, "I need you to step back. Let's end this now." Wade didn't move at first. His eyes scanned the crowd, their faces lit with curiosity and quiet outrage. Every lens, every pair of eyes, they were all on him, and he hated it. He could feel the control slipping from his hands, could feel his authority unraveling in real time, and he couldn't stop it. But then, one by one, voices started to rise from the crowd. They weren't shouts. Not yet. Just questions, but sharp ones. "What's she done, Sheriff? She gave you her license, didn't she? That woman's unarmed." "Wade." We saw. Cassie's camera panned slowly, capturing the tension building like storm clouds ready to break. Angela opened her car door, the soft creak of the hinges loud against the quiet. She stood slowly, gracefully, never once breaking eye contact with Wade. The crowd leaned in, as though holding its collective breath. "I have nothing to hide," Angela said clearly, her voice ringing out across the road, "but I will not be intimidated. Not here. Not tonight." And then, quietly but powerfully, she stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and the sheriff. Wade didn't retreat, but his stance shifted, his weight uneven, his jaw tightening with every step she took. "I gave you every opportunity to handle this lawfully," she continued, standing firm, "but you chose something else." Her words landed heavy, the silence afterwards stretching long and taut. More people gathered now, veterans, church members, neighbors who recognized Angela, even if they hadn't seen her in years. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's Angela Coleman. She's a general, a major general. Army. The weight of her reputation settled over the scene like a second storm. And Wade, he felt it, his face flushed, a deep red climbing up his neck, pooling beneath his collar. Mayor Delgado stepped forward, placing a hand on Angela's shoulder, grounding the moment. His voice broke the quiet. "This ends now," Delgado said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Chief Norris will handle this." "Sheriff Rourke, you're relieved of duty until further notice." Wade's eyes flashed, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't have that authority." Delgado cut him off, voice sharper now, steel threading through the words. "I have the authority to protect my citizens, Wade. And that includes protecting them from you." The crowd stirred, murmurs turning to gasps. Then small waves of approval. Wade's jaw worked as though chewing the words he wanted to spit back. But the presence of Norris, Delgado, and the watching crowd left him no space to fight. Norris stepped in, close enough that only Wade could hear. "Walk away, Sheriff. Don't make this worse." Reluctantly, Wade turned, his boots crunching against the gravel as he marched back to his cruiser, but his posture told the story rigid, brimming with resentment. He slammed the door shut, and for a moment, the only sound was the idling engine. Angela stood tall, watching him go. But she wasn't done. She turned to face the crowd, her voice rising above the murmurs. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about every person who's ever been treated as less than because of how they look, where they're from, or what they drive. This is about a system that lets power go unchecked." The crowd stilled, listening. "I've spent my life defending this country," she continued, her words calm but fierce. "Not for this. Not for moments like these." Cassie's phone stayed steady, capturing every word, beaming it out to the world beyond this two-lane road. Angela paused, scanning the faces in front of her, her gaze softening. "We deserve better," she said simply. "All of us." Mayor Delgado nodded, stepping closer. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying the weight of leadership. "There will be accountability." From across the street, a voice called out, "We've got your back, General." Another voice echoed the sentiment, and then another, the energy in the crowd shifting from outrage to solidarity. They weren't just witnesses anymore, they were participants. Angela gave a small nod, gratitude flickering in her eyes, but the weight of the night hung heavy. She knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy, but tonight, at least, she wasn't standing alone. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the fire had been lit. The footage was out. The story was no longer contained to Fairmont. It was spreading, and as Angela turned back toward her car, the glow of the streetlights reflected in her eyes. She had come to Fairmont for a dinner, a quiet evening, but what unfolded here, this would be far louder, and far from over. By morning, Fairmont wasn't just a small Texas town anymore. It had become a headline. The video Cassie Monroe recorded the footage of Sheriff Wade Rourke drawing his gun, the way Angela Coleman stood her ground, the crowd gathering, the confrontation with the mayor, all of it was now echoing across social media, picked up by news outlets far outside the dusty roads of Fairmont. What started as one bystander's instinct to press record had become something unstoppable. Angela watched the storm unfold from the quiet of her motel room just outside town. The television flickered with familiar images, the sheriff's hand trembling on his holster, the glow of patrol car lights, her own face calm and steady as the barrel of a gun pointed at her. She sat at the edge of the bed, the old springs creaking beneath her, watching the story of her life replayed through the lens of others. Commentators debated what they saw. Headlines scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Sheriff draws weapon on unarmed woman, general fights back. Fairmont at the center of national debate on policing. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, a steady rhythm of calls and messages. Reporters, activists, friends from across the country. She'd lived most of her life out of the spotlight. But now, the light burned bright, and she knew, even if the news cycle moved on, Fairmont would never be the same. Mayor Frank Delgado stood at the center of his office, hands on his hips, staring out the window at the town square below, the same square that, just last week, hosted the farmers' market, where families gathered, where kids ran laughing between the stalls. Now, people gathered there for a different reason. They held signs that read "Justice for Angela" and "End Abuse of Power." Their faces were different this time, angry, determined, unwilling to let this moment pass. Frank rubbed at his temples, the weight of leadership pressing down heavier than it ever had before. The press conference was scheduled for noon. The local station had called 3 times already, asking for a statement. The state's attorney general was watching closely, but it wasn't the officials or the reporters that weighed most on Frank's mind. It was the people outside that window. Sheriff Wade Rourke sat in his own office, the blinds drawn shut against the morning sun. The quiet felt oppressive now, like the walls were closing in. His badge sat on the desk in front of him, a tarnished reminder of everything he stood to lose. His phone buzzed too, but he let it ring. He wasn't ready for what waited on the other end. Headlines, accusations, suspension. Everyone wanted a piece of him. And for the first time in years, Wade felt something like fear gnaw at the edges of his resolve. Angela knew the press conference would be a circus. She'd spent too many years watching how these things played out. But when Mayor Delgado called that morning, asking her to stand beside him, she didn't hesitate. "I don't want this to be about me," she told him, her voice low but steady. Frank didn't flinch. "It already is, Angela. But it's not just about you. It's about what comes next." By noon, the town square was packed. Cameras lined the front steps of the courthouse, microphones poised. Reporters jostled for space, their questions flying before the mayor even reached the podium. Angela stood just behind him, her presence undeniable. She wore a simple navy blazer, the silver in her hair catching the sunlight. She stood tall, her shoulders back. Every inch the leader she'd spent her life becoming, even if the uniform was gone. Mayor Delgado stepped forward, clearing his throat before speaking. "What happened here in Fairmont," he began, his voice carrying across the square, "was unacceptable." The crowd listened, hanging on every word. No one, regardless of race, gender, or background, should ever face what Angela Coleman endured on our streets. And Sheriff Wade Rourke's actions do not reflect the values of this town or its people. Reporters raised their hands, their voices overlapping. "Is the sheriff fired? What's next for Fairmont?" Delgado raised a hand, silencing the questions. "Sheriff Rourke has been suspended, pending a full investigation. But let me be clear, that's just the beginning." He gestured toward Angela, who stepped forward. The microphones turned, the cameras shifting to capture her. Angela's gaze swept the crowd. She didn't smile. She didn't soften the truth. "I didn't come here to speak today," she began, her voice steady. "But I know too many people don't get the chance to be heard, so I'll speak for them." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "This isn't just about one sheriff, one stop, or one town. It's about a system that allows abuse of power to go unchecked. And unless we face it head-on, it will keep happening," the crowd murmured, the signs raised higher. Angela continued, "I spent over 3 decades defending this country. I've stood on battlefields. I've faced down enemies who wanted to silence me. But no moment, no enemy, has ever felt quite like standing on the side of that road, looking down the barrel of a gun held by someone sworn to protect me." Her voice caught just slightly, but she steadied herself. "We can't keep pretending these moments are isolated. They're not. And until we're willing to confront the root of the problem, they won't stop." The crowd erupted into applause. Some shouted words of encouragement. Others stood silent, absorbing the gravity of her truth. Reporters pushed forward again. "General Coleman, What changes do you want to see? Angela's eyes stayed fixed on the crowd. Accountability, she said simply. Transparency. Training that goes beyond procedures and gets to the heart of bias and power. She nodded toward Mayor Delgado. And leadership that doesn't flinch when it's uncomfortable. Frank stepped back to the podium, nodding. There will be reforms in Fairmont, he said. Mandatory bias training for every officer. A citizen oversight board. And we will hold law enforcement to a higher standard. Reporters fired off more questions. The crowd surged with energy. But Angela stepped back, letting the mayor finish. Cassie Monroe stood at the back of the square, her phone still raised, recording every moment. The same instinct that told her to press record the night before kept her there now, watching, witnessing, making sure this moment didn't slip away. Because even as Angela's words echoed across the square, even as promises were made, Cassie knew everyone knew this wasn't the end. It was just the start of the fight. And in Fairmont, Texas, the whole country was watching. By the end of the day, Fairmont's town square was empty again. The crowd dispersed, the cameras gone, but the echo of that press conference lingered. It rippled through the streets, through the quiet homes where families sat watching the news, through the phones in people's hands, scrolling through headlines that still bore Angela Coleman's face. In towns like Fairmont, things didn't usually change this fast. But this time felt different. For Sheriff Wade Rourke, the fallout came swiftly. By morning, the Fairmont Police Department had released a public statement confirming his suspension, and the words felt as sharp as a dismissal. The world didn't wait for the investigation to conclude. The video of him standing outside Angela's car, gun drawn, had been played and replayed, dissected by pundits, condemned by politicians, and shared by millions. There was no escaping it. Wade sat alone in his house on the edge of town, staring at the muted TV screen. His badge, polished to a shine he never cared much about before, sat on the coffee table like a relic from a life already slipping away. He ran his hands over his face, the rough stubble catching beneath his fingers, and tried to drown out the noise of the world closing in. The news anchors talked about reform, about accountability. They called him reckless, called him dangerous. But for Wade, it wasn't about the policies or procedures they debated. It was about the way people looked at him now, like he was something they had to clean up, wipe away to make themselves feel better. And he hated it. At the Fairmont Police Department, Chief David Norris stood at the head of a table surrounded by his senior officers. The mood in the room was heavy, the silence thick. Norris placed his hands flat on the table, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about one man," he said. "This is about the trust between us and the people we're sworn to protect." No one argued. They couldn't, not after what they'd all seen, not after the video. "We've launched a full investigation," Norris continued, "and that process will be thorough. But in the meantime, we're implementing changes, mandatory bias training, a citizen oversight board, policies that should have been in place long before now." The words sounded like progress, but even Norris knew it wasn't enough, not yet. Trust wasn't something you earned back with promises. It took time, and Fairmont was watching. For Angela Coleman, the days following the press conference felt like a blur. The interviews, the calls from activists, the invitations to speak at events across the state, but she didn't care much for the spotlight. She cared about the people who stopped her in the grocery store, who whispered words of thanks as she walked down the street. They were the reason she showed up. They were the reason she stayed. One afternoon, she found herself standing outside the local Veterans Center, the small brick building where she'd first planned to spend her evening before all this happened. She'd come for the dinner, the conversation, the chance to connect with people who understood service, sacrifice. Now, she stood there for something else. Inside, a group of veterans sat in a circle, their conversations quiet but intense. They weren't talking about wars fought overseas, they were talking about Fairmont, about what it meant to serve a country that still struggled with justice at home. Angela listened, nodding, sharing when she needed to, but mostly, she let them speak. The weight of their words was enough. One man, a Vietnam veteran, with a voice like gravel, leaned forward. "You think this is really going to change anything?" he asked, his eyes tired but searching. "Or is this just another story that gets forgotten?" Angela looked him square in the eye, her voice soft but firm. "It changes when we don't let it fade, when we keep showing up." Outside the Veterans Center, the streets of Fairmont felt different. The signs that read "Justice for Angela" still hung in some windows. People stopped to talk, to share their stories. Small conversations, but important ones. At City Hall, Mayor Delgado met with community leaders, listening to their concerns, hearing their demands. The pressure for real reform hadn't eased. If anything, it had grown. Fairmont wasn't going back to the way things were before. Not now. But change never came easy. A few voices in town pushed back. "It's just one bad cop," some argued. "We don't need all these new rules." Others whispered about Angela, calling her an outsider, blaming her for stirring up trouble. Angela heard it. She felt the tension, but she didn't flinch. She knew what it took to stand firm. One evening, she returned to the town square. The crowd was smaller this time, just a handful of people gathered, talking quietly beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. But among them was Cassie Monroe, the young woman whose video had turned a local injustice into a national conversation. She stood with her arms crossed, phone in hand, watching as Angela approached. "I wasn't sure you'd come back here," Cassie said, her voice carrying a mix of admiration and weariness. Angela offered a faint smile. "Fairmont's my town too," Cassie hesitated, then asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. "Do you think Sheriff Rourke's going to be fired?" Angela didn't answer right away. She looked around the square, remembering how it had felt that night, the fear, the defiance, the weight of every eye watching. "I think what happens to him is only part of the story," she finally said. "The real question is, what happens to Fairmont?" Cassie nodded slowly, understanding. As they stood there, the bells from the church tower rang out softly in the distance, a quiet reminder that time moved forward, that the story wasn't finished. And Angela Coleman knew the fight for justice, real justice, wasn't about one man, one moment, or even one town. It was about what came next. The weeks that followed weren't quiet. Not for Angela Coleman, not for Fairmont. Sheriff Wade Rourke's suspension turned into termination after the investigation confirmed what the world had already seen with their own eyes. He had crossed every line: abuse of power, reckless endangerment, racial profiling. The evidence was there. The video told the story, better than any report ever could. But Angela knew that firing one man wouldn't fix what was broken. The day the announcement came, she sat quietly in the town square, watching the people of Fairmont go about their lives. Some nodded as they passed her, small gestures of solidarity. Others averted their eyes. Not everyone agreed with the outcome, but the conversation was happening. It was out in the open now, where it couldn't be ignored. Mayor Delgado stood before the press once more, this time flanked by Police Chief David Norris and members of the newly formed Citizen Oversight Board. The reforms weren't just talk anymore, they were in motion. Bias training, stricter accountability, community engagement programs, all meant to rebuild the trust that Sheriff Rourke had shattered. But Angela didn't wait for the system to catch up. She stepped forward. She started meeting with local leaders, veterans, and activists, forming coalitions that stretched beyond Fairmont. Her voice, once quiet and reserved, now resonated in town halls, community centers, and church basements. She wasn't leading with anger, though she had every right to. She led with purpose, with clarity. One of her first initiatives was partnering with Mayor Delgado and Chief Norris to bring real hands-on training to the officers of Fairmont. Not just check-the-box sessions on policy, but honest conversations about bias, power, and accountability. Angela stood in front of those officers, most of whom had worn their badges for years, and told them her story, not to shame them, but to remind them of the weight they carried, the responsibility that came with their roles. She spoke of leadership, of what it meant to serve, and people listened. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the room went silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. Some officers crossed their arms, leaned back in their chairs, resistant. But others leaned forward, listening, reflecting. And Angela knew change didn't happen all at once. It happened in those moments, in the way people began to question their assumptions, in the way they started to see Cassie Monroe, the young woman whose video sparked the firestorm, continued to document every step of the process. She recorded the community meetings, interviewed local residents, posted updates as reforms were implemented. Her platform grew beyond Fairmont, reaching people across the country. But Cassie never lost sight of where it started. "It's not just about catching bad cops on camera," she said in one of her videos. "It's about what we do next." And Fairmont was doing the work. Angela helped organize regular town forums where residents could speak directly to the police, voicing their concerns without fear. It wasn't always smooth. There were arguments, frustrations, even tears. But the conversations kept going. The walls between law enforcement and the people they served began to crack just a little, and then came the mural. It started as an idea from a local artist, a way to commemorate what had happened, but also to offer hope for what could come next. The wall of an old building near the town square became their canvas. Slowly, color by color, stroke by stroke, it came to life. Angela's silhouette stood at the center, strong and steady, surrounded by images of Fairmont's people, neighbors, veterans, children, police officers, all intertwined. Above them, painted in bold letters, "Justice is service." Angela didn't want her face on that wall, but the artist insisted, and the community backed him. It wasn't just about honoring what she'd endured, it was about reminding Fairmont who they could be. The unveiling drew a crowd, families, reporters, activists, police officers, all standing together, looking up at the towering image. For a moment, Fairmont felt unified. The pain wasn't gone, but the healing had begun. Angela stood at the front, her gaze lifted to the mural, her arms crossed over her chest. She didn't speak that day. She let the mural speak for itself. But the weight in her heart felt lighter. Across the country, other towns watched what was happening in Fairmont. The headlines faded, as they always do. But the story lived on in smaller ways. In local councils debating new reforms, in classrooms discussing power and prejudice, in communities asking hard questions, Angela kept working, kept showing up. One evening, at the Veterans Center, a young officer approached her after a training session. He looked nervous, hands stuffed in his pockets, eyes downcast. "I just wanted to say," he began, his voice low, "I didn't know how much I didn't know." Angela looked at him, waiting. "I never thought I was part of the problem," he continued. "But now, I see it." She nodded slowly. "Seeing it is the first step," she said softly. "What you do next is what matters." That's what it always came down to. What happens next? Fairmont wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was moving. And for Angela Coleman, that was enough for now, because justice wasn't a destination. It was a path, one you walked, step by step, day by day. And in Fairmont, that path had begun. In the quiet streets of Fairmont, a powerful lesson unfolded, one that reaches far beyond a single town, a single sheriff, or even one brave woman standing her ground. It reminds us that injustice thrives in silence, but accountability begins the moment we speak up. Angela Coleman's story isn't just about courage in the face of abuse, it's about the power of persistence, of refusing to let wrongs be buried beneath excuses. For our older generation, who've witnessed the tides of history, this is a call to remember. We are never too old to demand better. Whether it's standing up for ourselves or for others, every voice matters. Change doesn't come easy, it comes from showing up, from having the hard conversations, from holding power accountable. And sometimes it comes from simply pressing record, like Cassie did, making sure the truth cannot be ignored. No matter our age, we carry the wisdom to recognize injustice and the responsibility to challenge it, because justice, at its heart, is about service to each other, to our communities, to the generations that come after us, and that service never ends. If this message touched you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Together, we can keep these conversations alive.